I'm here with Joe and Brian, and I want to tell you about things about the system where your end users might be able to think that things are broken, but you can tell them differently because it works like this kind of thing, mostly is what I'm concerned with. Give you guys a sense of confidence about the system. Make sure you know what your resources are, what the capabilities are, see the kind of process that we're dealing with so that you can do and change things with the system to match the end user's expectations, right? All right, so the big thing is the switches. These are a six function slider here on the left-hand side, and you'll have the other switches with the little lights on the side as well. It's called an DM101. The lights indicate the level of the light that's being controlled by the switch, right? Most of the buildings 0 to 10 volt dimming. And so when you dim things, you press and hold and it lowers the lights, and you press and hold and it raises the lights if there's dimming fixtures in there right there. Now there are a couple of situations where we had dimming switches and non-dimming loads. You guys will have the cut sheets and things, the drawings to go and look up what, fixture you had in that space, and you'll know that it's dimming or non-dimming. You'll be able to tell us, hey, I've got a dimming fixture, but it's not dimming, what's my problem? Now there's a 1-800 number, 1-800-879-8585 that you can call, lets us get in touch with you, and honestly, that's a number that I call, Joe. I know you look at me like, you're cynical, but it's true. These guys have good talents. They also, often, they're better at telling you about the interface because they do it over the phone, and they use the words. I just do it at the interface level, and I don't use the words kind of thing. So they're your first resource. Of course, I'm always available, especially for a job this big. There's 6 different floors here. We know that there's going to be some issues, moving in, changing things like that. So just, bear in mind, what we want to give the end user and what you guys are capable of, All right, so 6 functions. You can press and hold, and it raises and lowers depending on top or bottom, right? So there's 2 essential buttons down there, right? If I press it once, it goes up slowly. If I press it once at the bottom, it goes down slowly. If I press it twice, it goes up instantly. And if I press it twice at the bottom, it goes off instantly. And I'll just demonstrate the off, right? Now there's still one circuit on that's controlled from another switch, I think, right? If I press it twice, it raises up, all right? So if we want to change things, we have a transceiver down here at the bottom. There's an LMCT, which is just a little, show you what it looks like. Right here, it's got a little screen on it. It's got a little infrared transceiver. It's got a menu that comes up initially. And if you want to change the way things are, the 1-800 guys will walk you through how to change things. We can change what switch controls which load. We can control sensors and which loads they're associated with. We can make default levels for the lighting when you turn it on. It can come on to 100% or it can come on to 80%, right? And so that is what this enables. Also, throughout the building, there are some areas where there's daylight harvesting. And you can interface with the daylight harvesting and make changes to the way that works as well. And we'll go over that later in the lobby, okay? Okay. Because I definitely want you to see what it looks like in the lobby. And daylight harvesting is sometimes an issue with the end users. They like, it looks like my lights are broken, or I want it to be brighter in here, I want it to be darker in here, let them have control. I know that's one thing we talked about earlier. You sent me the email in regards to the lobby lights not being controlled by the switches. Right. Our daylight harvesting thing, it can be overridden at the switches. If we don't allow the switches to override that, then we're kind of at the mercy of that daylight harvesting. So I want you to get a look at that so that we know that we're doing the right thing. All right, so that's the switch. These are scene switches or they're load switches, and it can vary across the way the building's programmed. Like in certain rooms, it'll be a load. So this will actually turn the light on and off, right? This one's a load, so somebody's been here already. If it comes out of the box, our devices have certain programming called plug and go, right? If this comes out of the box and you replace it, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to see what's in the room by its serial number. It's going to associate itself with a certain hierarchy, and it's going to control, on this one button, it'll control every light in the room, right? On the other buttons, it'll control scene buttons, and the scenes out of the box are like 100%, 75, 50, and 25% out of the box. I think that's how it goes. It could be like 10 or 25, I don't remember. But essentially that out-of-the-box programming is in all the devices. So when you plug it into the room, it'll just continue to work. Now we've got a network system, and I'll show you the networking portion of that down in that electric room. I think we've seen that before, right? That networking can exist, and that allows different things like the common areas throughout the building to run a certain schedule, or the exterior lights in the building run a different schedule, and so the networking allows that to work. Essentially, the brain tells it what time it is and what the lights need to do. The room, if it's disconnected from the network, if somebody goes into the ceiling or you have a flood or, an earthquake, right? Or, the big one hits in California. The network goes down, the room continues to function, right? And when in all cases, this stuff will function per room, and we can get you to the point where you have at least your lights on and controllable if the hardware's there, or at least they're on. You know what I mean? Okay. So there's that switch, and then we're going to move over here to the sensor, and I'll show you what that looks like.
Now, if this switch malfunctions or is disabled, do these lights default to
on? Yep.
100% on?
Yes. Okay. Yes. That can be programmed differently, though. So, yeah.
And what if it loses connection with PC or main computer programming?
The room will still continue to function.
Okay.
Now the schedules won't function. So for instance, you'll be able to tell if your hallway's not on because you walk in the daytime and it's 8 o'clock in the morning and the hallways aren't on. Then you know that the network and the brain didn't actually get the message out to the hallway room, right? Troubleshooting this, essentially if you've got a light on it, you've got power. Usually if you have some sensibility about the light, if it's not flashing or doing something really weird, then we know that we're connected in a way that speaks to things. I can use this piece as well to ask which devices are available on the network. So I can send messages from this transceiver to that transceiver and out to the room, and I can sequence through all the devices in the room to see that they're functional or making sense on the data of the room. I can also check network status as well. All right, don't worry, that's something you'll probably never do, honestly. You'll probably use this, 2 or 3 times. We'll leave it down there at Seg Managers where I recommend the brain of the system down in the electric room. And then you'll call us and say, hey, I've got a problem, and then we'll tell you, hey, go look at your Seg Manager, go get this thing, and that'll fix it, and hopefully everything will be set, right? And then we also have a computer interface that interfaces with the segment manager that I'll show you more about later, okay? Okay. All right, Joe, any other questions, Brian?
You said when this comes out of the box and you plug it in, it's set for?
Scene buttons on the right, and then a control for all the loads that it's seeing in the room.
But right now this one's programmed for loads? Individual loads,
correct.
Okay. And then my other question was about, you said the daylight harvesting, is that what you called it? Mm-hmm. So these windows all tint automatically? Mm-hmm. Are the lights going to adjust based on, okay.
Yep, the lights will adjust for furniture that's not here as well, which means that likely at some point we're going to have to change something because the level of light's going to be different than what you expect.
Yeah, could be cool.
Right, exactly. So we're back to the sensors here. So most of the sensors in the building have been programmed to be manual on. So you have to go to the switch to turn your lights on. With the exception of bathrooms, we wanted those to be auto on, so when you walk into a bathroom, the light's on. If you're sitting in the bathroom and the lights go off for 20 minutes, is the time limit. And you wave your arms around, the ultrasonic in that first 5 seconds should be enough to turn it on. Typically though, when you walk into a space, and there could be issues with the sensors, so I want you to, that's why I'm telling you this. Like when you walk into a space, both of the dual technologies have to trigger so that you have a turn on event, right, for the room. The technologies, the blue light is the ultrasonic, and those are the little speaker looking things on the side there. There's a transceiver there as well, that black patch there speaks to this guy, so I can test a room. It's fairly easy to test a room. We'll go through that. The infrared is the lens in the middle, and so essentially if something is 10 degrees greater than ambient, it picks up a change between the two lenses and says, okay, somebody must be there as far as infrared. And you can tell when they trigger, so that when the red light goes off, that's infrared. When the blue light goes off, that's ultrasonic. And so ultrasonic essentially rings the room. It receives a certain level of echo for the sound that it's putting out from those speakers. And when somebody moves in the room, even around a corner, that echo changes slightly and they're able to detect that. So both of those technologies are used to trigger it on, and then either of the technologies keep it on for that, in that window of 20 minutes, you re-trigger it, counter resets to 20 minutes and then counts down to the next occupancy event. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. All right, so if you walk into a space and you see the blue light constantly going off because this thing's too close to a register and the echo of the ultrasonic is going down the tube and getting the fan that's blowing in the HVAC, then that blue light will be on all the time. So you kind of be able to tell, hey, we've got an issue. We can adjust that sensitivity with the LMCT, okay, right? And we can turn it down or eliminate the ultrasonic from that particular sensor or reposition the sensor. And again, the 1-800 number will be your source for kind of diagnosing that kind of thing. Okay. All right, so dual technology, you know how that works. All of these devices, the switch on the wall, there's inside the ceilings, usually near the doors is where they've put them. On a J-box, there's a room controller that's installed. And all these things are connected by Cat5, and they have indicators on them that show whether or not they're powered on. With the sensors, we even have an error code, so you can tell the guys, hey, I've got error 08, and it indicates something on the sensor, and they can diagnose it, essentially. Most of your issues will be from Cat5 getting unplugged, from somebody being in the ceiling or something like that. Okay. On the room controllers, there's actually an override button, so you can override the relays and make sure that you're speaking to the room controller in the room that you want to make sure, it's functioning correctly. So you can override the lights. There's a config button as well, which will essentially put that thing into its plug and go, like when you pull it out of the box, and that's not a good thing. We can treat it though from the interface, the networked interface. As long as it's on the network, we can reset it. The complexity of the programming is not much, so we'll be able to talk you through changes too.
So if someone was in the ceiling and unplugged this device here,
mm-hmm.
Is it addressable? Would you know it from the main computer? Will it tell you which device, and what effect would that have on this room, just this one?
Honestly, I don't think it wouldn't be a huge effect. I know that we've got multiple sensors in this space here, and you only have to hit the sensor twice. You're going to walk in the room and the lights are going to be off anyway, manually on, right? You turn on the lights, and then as long as the sensor gets something in the next 20 minutes, the lights will stay on, right? So you wouldn't notice anything except that, hey, this thing's not lit up anymore, or my lights go off too often, essentially, if this was broke. Now, if there are two Cat5s in there, and this is on a daisy chain of devices, if we unplug one of those, then some of the other devices might not be responsive either, because the switches and the sensors actually receive power across the Cat5, 24 volts from the room controller. Good question, because it points out something I need to point out to you as far as troubleshooting. And so a lot of times you'll see, hey, there's a daisy chain of devices, something's broke, the power's still on to all the devices, but one of them's got a mixed up Cat5 or something like this, or we've nicked a wire. You can just unplug things, and when things start making sense again, then you know that part of the network is good. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Now, in your interface, you'll actually see a list of devices in rooms, and there'll be a clear, black and white for functioning, and then there'll be a grayed out or a yellowed title for the room if they've got an issue, if we've lost. And we can establish communication with the devices too immediately per single. So this is the brain of the system, essentially the networked aspect of this, where the scheduling and the calendar and the interface is located for you guys. So this is a little computer. It serves a web page. The web page goes through this switch hub kind of thing. Everything's on the same first 3 numbers of the IP address, right? unsecured, so don't plug your network into this. You're going to plug a network cable. If you need a network situation, you're going to plug a network cable down here to this one on the right-hand side. We're going to maintain this connection here to the middle port, which is port 2, is what we call it, right? And this port then speaks to these guys, which are routers, through this hub to the routers, and the routers speak MSTP BACnet to the various bridges for each room. Right, so like a bridge could be 3 rooms. Actually, we have the X-ray room here on this floor, right? 3 different areas, 3 different loads, 3 different switches, all controlling different things, right? And then we also have a separate room on the other side of the gift shop, which is actually in the same room with the bathrooms. There's 7 different loads, 4 different switches, 3 different sets of sensors. So that's the kind of thing you have to keep straight, right? And that's happening in the interface there, so we can kind of show you what those settings are. It makes sense to you guys to see what those settings are on the devices in the interface, so you kind of know what you're doing in terms of the LMCT, the infrared device, right? All right, so the MSTP, that you can see the little green light going off, this is the 5th floor here. There's no wires to that because there's no bridges or rooms up there. And of course, you don't see any MSTP traffic. If you see this freeze, either on or off and never change, we may have just accidentally caused a fault on the system and it just kicked it out and said stop. That usually comes from an interface over here, but it can happen anywhere. If you just power this down, power back up, we can go back to the other settings, the regular settings, and it'll reinitialize all of its controls. All right, so this is floor 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is floor 6. This goes MSTP style, twisted pair. 2 wires essentially are communicating, 1 wire for a reference. At the end of this chain of wires, there's a resistor that terminates it, so we don't have a mismatch on the waveforms to the different wires, right? It's all one steady ringing sound, right? This interfaces with those devices, and then we have a web page that's served up from this, and I'll show you that web page.
Okay.
All right, guys?
Is this communicating, like say I dimmed a switch out in the field, I dimmed a light, is that being communicated through here, or is this just uploading like the schedule basically to all those field devices?
This will update if you're looking at the device.
Okay.
That's when it updates. So it turns a spotlight on the room, and the room is interfaced virtually, and you can see the results of dimming happen.
Okay.
It's not doing everything at once, talking. The brain doesn't care unless you're looking at it, kind of thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yes, it's communicating.
Okay.
Okay. So the interface is a network interface. We're going to edit our computer's interface. This is what you would do when you bring your notebook, essentially, right? Here's the connection that we have, a local area connection. We look at the properties. We're going to just keep it simple and talk TCP IP4. These 3 numbers have to match between your computer and your direct interface to our device. And you're just going to plug directly from your computer to that switch over there that we showed you. And so I'm at 99 and the device is at 100 and 101, 106 version of things, right? And we've got this subnet mask, etc., right? That's fine. 255, 254, it doesn't matter here because we're talking through the same hub. Across your network, it will matter. And these addresses can change so that if you plug into port 1 and you want it across your network, you want to say the security guard sits at the front desk and he can see the status of lights, and then we would need to change these addresses to match your network, or your network would have to match this, right? Separate thing, right? So I don't need to change that because I know it works, right? All right, so your interface is going to be primarily the web interface. So we just open a browser. I prefer Chrome. I don't prefer Internet Explorer, right? And so we're talking to 192.168.5 and .128, I think is what it was here. All right, when you first bring this up on your computer, you won't get this screen. You'll get a warning, hey, this is an unsecure website. Ignore the warning, hit advanced, and say go anyway, right? Don't worry, we'll go over all this other stuff. We can talk you through all of this once you actually interface with it, right? So admin, in lowercase, tab to the password section, it's going to be W @TTSTOPPER Watt Stopper with a @ for the A, right? And then you log in. On the first login for your computer, it'll take even longer than it just did, essentially. We've got a little tiny computer that's trying to do what we need to do for the lights, and then you've asked it to create a web page for you. And so that's what's happening here. Your normal interface would look like, this is where it'll come out initially. And it shows you like a serial number, it shows you the CPU usage, it shows you the versions of things and things like that, right? And you can change the site name, that site name, and then it appears up there at the top. You have a correct time and date. You've got sunrise at 6:54, you've got sunset at 5:45, right? You can look at your dashboard. It's where you'll mostly, like your security guard's interface would be at the dashboard, right? And so you can see, once you enter information for these different rooms, how much watts each of the room controllers, each of the loads is using, then you'll see this fill in with information to tell you how many watts you use across the whole facility, right? And so you can just create this. This is a website for this building, right? If you had a campus and you wanted other buildings, you just put them all on the network and you talk to another address and another brain for another building. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right, so here we have a schedule. This shows the different events. This is the sunrise setting, right? And you can kind of look and see what those events are. And then this is the sunset setting. It essentially turns the lights on. And then this is the exterior, or the, this is actually building on normal hours, and this is building off after hours, right? And so during normal hours, our common areas, which we've designated as hallways and public spaces where we want to keep the lights on, they'll only, because of the sensor, they'll only turn the lights on, they won't turn the lights off, right?
Okay.
After hours, it'll turn them on and off. And then if you hit the override, the button works for 2 hours, I think is what the setting is. And so then after that 2 hours is up, then the override goes away and the response to the sensor again turns off. Okay. So that way we save energy, but we also keep our public spaces on. One of the changes I expect you'll make is that you realize that you don't want your lobby to turn off, or you don't want certain hallways to turn off, and then we'll take those out of this group, essentially, that's being controlled by these normal hours, after hours. Or we'll change the behavior of the individual power packs. They'll stay in the group. It'll still be normal hours. They'll only turn on anyway, but we won't automatically turn them on. Okay. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that will change, and I'll show you what that interface looks like too. The exterior lights, we still have an issue with the welcome sign. It's on all the time currently. We're going to change that situation as soon as possible. You've got, so if you want to look at things from the dashboard, that's there. If you go back to the configure, we can actually drill down into individual rooms, and I'll show you what that looks like, hopefully, if it'll be responsive. Make this a little bit bigger so we can see it on camera better. All right, so under configure, we have these different things here, so we can change settings. If I wanted to change network settings, for instance, if I wanted to, I could change the way the addresses work on the different ports. We're speaking to this port 2 right now. I could change backnet settings, and I can enable different networks and things like that. Again, network 2 is where we're talking. We can discover new devices, update new devices. We can do demand response here as well. We can look at the individual devices as they're listed in the different areas. I can normally, for you guys, devices by name is helpful. Right, and so named, there have been recent additions. They might actually have names on the loads or the room controllers. We'll figure out what those are today. The rest of these different things are labeled by room. If it's a common area, I put common in there. And then I said it was a hallway for, looks like 3B or 3S, right? So if you click into that, first of all, this is online. This is talking to us because it's not yellowed out. If it was yellowed out, it would be offline. I can see the sensors. I can see the room controller at the top here. I can see what the settings are and things like that. I can come down to the load, right? So it's a kind of a hierarchy, and you drill down from the different areas. I label everything on the 3rd floor like it's room 3, right? And then one of the loads should be named for for the bridge, essentially. So this is the label for the bridge at the top here. And then the load should be named the same, essentially, so you can kind of look at loads, the room controllers.
Okay.
And then you can name the loads if you need to name the loads. You don't really need to name the loads, right? And I can turn this on and off. So like I can turn hallway S, 3S, common room on, and I can turn it off here. This is not being responsive for some reason. Again, we'll figure that out. But essentially, if things are online or offline here, and you can go to the settings and look and see what the settings are and even change the way things act.
You said if it was offline, it would be highlighted
Yellow, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, sometimes, like especially when I'm doing demos, things don't like to respond. Here, now it's back to its response. This is a large system, so it can take a long time. So that's on full. Here's the slider, right? And I can turn it off, and it may take a minute to update, 3 seconds, something like that. See? All right, so I'm turning on and off lights. And I can put all of these different loads into different groups. So like I can take the whole building and put it in a group, or I can take the 3rd floor, the nurse's station, and put it in a group,
Okay.
kind of thing. And so then we can actually control those individual groups from this interface as well. Make sense so far?
Yes.
All right, it helps you troubleshoot too, so you can see if things are online with the network and change the status of loads. And don't worry too, because you can come in here and you can change the name of this load here. So I can click in there into this text area, and instead of load A, I can call it the under counter light for nurse's station.
Okay.
You're limited to like 21 characters, so it starts to get tedious if you get into this kind of thing where you've labeled the room. But you should be able to find on the drawings a room 3H11, and it should be some kind of hallway, and the drawing will show the lights and the loads and things like that, and you'll be able to figure out which one's which.
Okay.
All right, so that's what that interface looks like. That's what the schedule interface looks like. We can change schedules. We can put things in different groups, all from this interface, right? So the 1-800 guys are going to walk you through that. I'm going to log out of this now.
If you go back to the zone
Sure.
and you can check the individual loads, is there a trend you can go back to, like say a month or a year's worth of data, and find out what you were using it?
There is. It's not often used. But yes, that's part of the lead requirement sometimes, to be able to log these things. So if you go back to this, interface here where the dashboard is. So this actually loads out and shows, like it'll show a line, and it'll show, once you have wattage information for these areas based on the clock and the wattage, right? There's an event that says, hey, essentially the brain knows when the conference room turns on, right, at a certain level, and it adjusts this line. And then this can be put out to, essentially logged to an Excel spreadsheet. So you keep this, like in the Birmingham, I know we've got a screen that shows the Birmingham office and the different lights that are on and the level, the kilowatt hours that we're using, and then logs that to trends in a spreadsheet.
Where's this information stored? Here in the main brain?
You would want your spreadsheet to be stored off the main brain. I'm not sure how that works. I've honestly never configured it. It might be a separate visit to configure all that. We'd want this to live on a network then, and you would pull the data essentially. You'd just pull a file off the segment manager.
Loads automatically.
Yeah, I think it's hours, 30 hours maybe, and when it updates. So you'd every day you'd have load in the file and add it, add it to the end of the Excel data, and then you'd have a program that would parse out the different.
The sunrise and sunset adjusts automatically, obviously, in the date and time.
Based on longitude and latitude, it's fed in there. They have a special chipset that everybody is supposedly using.
The daylight savings adjusts automatically.
Yep.
What if there's a special event like an eclipse or something like that? There's no photocells that interact with it at all? Okay.
You honestly should be fine. The lights will be on in the daytime for common areas, right? At nighttime, if you need an override, any clips won't matter, right? You know what I'm saying? The daylight harvesting will pick up any changes in the light and adjust the lights upwards in most of the areas where that's current, right? Okay. Other questions, sir?
What about overriding the outside lights if we wanted them on for whatever reason?
You could set them in a group and you can adjust the group status. You could create a new event and just for that one day do the override for the event, so like on a schedule. Or you can go to the individual outside lights and you can control them individually and just turn them on, and then the next event, scheduled event, will pick them up to where they need to go.
If we group them like that, say we needed to test the exterior lights or the garage lights or periodically,
Sure.
can it stay in that group so then the next time you do that
Absolutely.
test?
And you don't have to put that group on a schedule. It just stays there. And I think you can hold like 120 something different groups, 128, 127 different groups. There's a manual here, so you can click that, and once you're connected to the internet, it'll download a PDF. So some of the things aren't quite correct, like you can go and try and manage your users. There's actually 3 different user accounts, and that's what you're stuck with right now. There'll be an update later where we can change those, but essentially you can create new users, you can give them any of these 3 versions of accounts, but you won't be able to rename the new user and you won't be able to give them a password kind of deal.
Earlier you were saying that it communicates through BACnet. Is there any interface between the building management system and the lighting
Not
control
BACnet,
system?
not yet. Not yet. It's not specified in our job. We can link into the network and they can talk to us, and we can give them a report for different points and things like that. So, and we can even give them points for groups that we were speaking of earlier.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yep.
Okay. It's easy to do too. It's a one-day thing. All right. So I'm logging out of this. That's our web interface that you guys are looking at. I'm showing you this not because you're going to use it. Okay. This other new thing, LMCS, right? I just want to give you an idea of how we program things and what the settings look like and things like that. So I'll open the recent document. We keep a copy of this. So this is every setting for every device pulled down and pushed up by BACnet through the whole building. Okay? So we knew it work at this point. Here's your building. We can change the way things are named, but honestly, I'm the only one using this setting, so you can kind of see where we're at as far as the interface is concerned. All right, so here's that room. That's lobby. That's your main lobby, actually, I think. And here you break down and you have your loads, and we've labeled those because some of those are important when we were doing our switching, right? So we're trying to figure out which switch does what, right? So we named some of them and didn't name some of them, right? So that's there. If you click into this, you can talk about how this load behaves for normal hours and after hours, and we can change that. Most of this we can change with that infrared device, the way it configures that way, so normal hours and after hours. But normal hours and after hours kind of stuff, that's at a level that you guys don't need me to mess with. You can adjust individual loads. If you click on this and you don't get a screen here, then we know we've got an issue, right? And you'll see that in yellow on your web interface as well. So you can see what devices are installed here. You can see what you have to program. There are different trim levels, like it can go from 0 to 100 if we wanted to limit it to only go to 80% and only go down to 15%. Sometimes you get a light and it's just flickery at 10% and you want to change the way it's done, then that's the kind of thing you do here. Again, with that infrared thing, I can tell it a minimum trim level also, right? But it kind of makes more sense when you see these things in hierarchy. So here's your room controllers, here's your daylight harvesting piece, and here's the room, here's the areas that the loads that it controls are listed here. Here's the setting, and there's advanced things to do to it, like if you can override it by the switches, that kind of thing, right? And then here's your various sensors. And we can go to each of these sensors. Each sensor in the lobby essentially controls all the loads, right? We can go to each of these sensors and figure out which barcode is on it. And that's an important thing to understand. All the devices here have barcodes, and we have that documented at least with this file here, as we've discovered initially, and as we've programmed initially, we know which device is where. If you take this sensor and take it to a conference room somewhere, this sensor is still going to try and talk to all 11 of these devices, which are essentially virtual loads, 1, 2, 3, right?
Okay.
The conference room might only have loads 1, 2, and 3, but this is still going to try and talk to 5 through 11, right? It's not going to make sense to the sensor. You're going to have to, it's going to flash at you. It's still going to do what it's supposed to do for those loads 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So out of the box, this sensor will log into the room, figure out what loads there are, and pull in the loads. But once we've programmed it and we put this in a different room, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Are you able to remove those loads that are known?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, even with the LMCT, the infrared interface. Make sense? And you can change the way the buttons proceed. So like this button here is the first button, that's the slider button. And this is a 5-button switch with the 4 buttons on the side, right? And right now this is configured as a load button, and so it's controlling the pendant and things like this. Actually, it shouldn't be there like that, right? Because we didn't want our lobby switches to control anything. I'll have to interface with that and make sure it's not talking to anything.
Okay.
Yeah, so this one's correct, but that one button is showing as though it's controlling things. So I have to eliminate that before I go. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
All right,
Makes sense.
that's all I got. Questions? Hard questions. Challenge it. You'll never see that interface again,
Any
hopefully.
questions?
No. I was thinking maybe a cycling heater that someone brings in they're not supposed to bring in, goes off in the middle of the night, 3 times a night, say. That would switch on the room lights because of sonar or sound or heat, maybe, signature.
Maybe. I mean, you know, something under a desk that's going like this isn't going to bother us too much. Usually we don't pick it up. If you're, you know, head size or greater and you stand up, then it should turn on. It should trigger. You'll notice. I mean, you'll be able to see. I mean, you can essentially, the cycling heater be there all the time, and you can adjust the sensitivity of the sensor, and you would be able to figure out whether or not it's, you know, triggering.
So you just brought up a good question. I was thinking those blue receptacles that are in the room, those are being fed off.
Plug load controllers, yeah, LMPL 101s. Those are only out of the box, right? They're programmed to listen to occupancy. And all the occupancy sensors out of the box, they reset and they control. That's normally not something that we program. In certain cases, in this building, we programmed it. But essentially, those plug load controllers listen to the occupancy sensors in the room, and they know if it's occupied, and that's when they turn on and off.
And is that regardless of, you said most of the lights in the room are manual?
Right? You could go in there, right? The occupancy sensor knows that you're in there. You could turn off the loads, and unless we've programmed the plug load controller to go with the lights, like in certain cases, we've done that because the plug load controller is not actually controlling an outlet, it's controlling a light in certain cases in this building, so like an under-counter light. So the way to test that is essentially to go to the room, the sensor, and you set the sensor for test. I'll show you the interface here. So we turn on, we get this initial screen here. We're going to do sensor configuration. There's a button here for select. That selects the option. We want to go to test mode here. Select the test mode option. You're usually going to test an individual sensor. So when you test this in a big room, for instance, you're going to ask the room to ignore the other sensors temporarily. Now you're going to point this transceiver at the sensor that you want to test. Now there's a certain period of time where the feed goes back and forth where you kind of need to hold it steady. And in a really bright room, and you're on the first floor and the sensor's up on the second floor, it can be really difficult to kind of, you know, pull into this. But if you hold it still and you aim at a sensor and you press that button, it pulls down the sensor's information. As soon as it pulls down sensor's information, you know A, that the sensor has power, and B, that the sensor is connected to something that's giving it power and is making sense of it, right? Once you have that information, then you just set this into test mode. That sensor goes to a mode where instead of taking 20 minutes to trigger, it takes 10 seconds, essentially. So you put it in test mode, you sit there and stand still underneath the sensor and you watch the blue and red lights. The blue and red lights aren't going off. You count to 8 and the sensor should trigger off. that whole room will go off at that time and the plug loads will turn off, right? And then initially you wave your hand again and the plug loads will turn right back on. So you'll be able to test the plug loads real easily to make sure that they're working. If they're not working, again, with this LMCT, we can make sure that they're responsive. We can change things.
Okay.
But in all the cases that I've been to, we don't have any plug loads that are not working. Some cases we have areas where there are too many of the plug load devices. 5 is too many, and we need to make it 4 only, and we got to replace one of those. That's still happening in 2 rooms that I know of. What else?
How far away can you stand on the ground?
I mean, I've stood outside of a room and gone 12 feet through a glass door. I've stood at the bottom of a 2.5-story tall lobby and still made it to this. Sometimes I can stand right next to a switch though, and the switch for whatever reason just will not receive. Sometimes these things can get in a mode where they just don't want to talk to us, so it varies. But often you'll get the hang of this pretty quickly if you use it. I don't expect you'll use it too much though. I mean, a lot of the things that you do would be from that interface, just a web interface.
The room controller that's up in the ceiling, is there a reason to communicate to that, or
You would communicate it through the
devices?
sensor or through the switches.
Okay,
It doesn't have a transceiver on it. It has to work with that room data.
gotcha.
Yes, there is a reason to communicate to that because you might want to change the way the buttons work, or you might upgrade this room to be 2 offices and want that over there and this over there.
Okay.
Cool, guys. Thank you.